Since this is a partnership for advancing gender equality and sustainability, I will start with one of the observations that I'm often forced to make when we talk about disasters, that there is and also when we talk about disaster reduction, unfortunately, although that's almost the opposite, that's about sustainability and resilience, and disasters is about temporarily weakening us. But in this conversation there is always this constant tension between vulnerability and seeing women as victims and helpless, and the work that really I think we are all doing is to demonstrate women's power, capacity and ability to provide leadership in communities. So we are sort of moving back and forth between these conversations, and it's never totally clear where we come up on this. So I will call for your continued persistence in making sure that you tip the balance in the right direction here. And that's particularly when it comes to the total area of disaster work. Some of you talked about male-dominated professions. Disaster response is one, if you are looking for one internationally. That is the empire of men. So it's very important that the few women that have the persistence to stay and that actually stay in it and hang on to it. I didn't, I must say, because I wanted to do disaster risk reduction and capacity strengthening of communities. So a few things that I find extremely encouraging and what has come up in your report back is this focus on in fact the political role of women. You have mentioned from the agriculture group on the cross-sectoral institutional work. Don't stick us only to the Ministry of Agriculture, but make sure this is a multi-ministerial, cross-ministerial issue. Prioritize. Over to the Oceans Group that was very precise on your recommendation on number of women in science, technology, etc. These are critical areas because it's very easy to identify where the gaps are. It's disaster response, science and technology and other areas. So these are really some of the things that I take away and that obviously are helpful to us as well. I also see between all these areas, if you look to what are the triggers of disasters and what are the impact of disasters, impact on all these areas. So if you take resilience and sustainability as a guiding framework, you will be able to link all these in order to reduce the impact on communities, women, children and countries of disasters. It's a lot about economics. It's a lot about political leadership to get the right policy framework and the right leadership. And I'd like to point out two areas where women's leadership are drastically and dramatically required. The first one is, in fact, having worked with cities over the last few years now, we have great difficulties in finding women mayors. It's a terrible minority. There are many deputy women mayors, for obvious reasons, but we really need to see a lot more of women mayors in very high profile. So every time we meet one, we try to sort of engage them into the network of urban leadership. So please, I heard you're from a local council, you can help us with that. And now all the urban associations, they say, when we raise this, say, yes, we agree, we know it's an issue. So hopefully they have some focus on that. But in terms of getting political impact at local level, critical. The other thing is, you will have noticed this, women's leadership in parliament and in private sector seem to be inversely proportional. So if you have a lot of women in parliament, you have very little in private sector and vice versa. Just look at the statistics globally, all your countries. IPU have them and many others. It's very interesting. It obviously has to do with social, cultural and economic structures. But think of it as an opportunity when you look at the groups that you would like to influence to ensure that the things that you now have put on the map as indicators will happen when we go to country levels. So So that's some of the opportunities that I really practical when I travel around and meet so many people in the world. A few things here, just not so long ago, I'm supposed to be tweeting, but of course I don't do it. I'm not really sure how to do this well, 40 characters or whatever it is. But when I came to a country in Southeast Asia not long ago, this goes back to the issue of modern technology. I was told that 10% of the population have access to internet, but 90% are tweeting, they have mobile phones. So then I said, okay, I understand now why it should be done. If you really want to access people, mobilize people, be they women or youngsters, you really have to think about technology. And I think we international bureaucrats have a very particular responsibility to make sure that our fascination with technology does not become a new barrier for access. We talk a lot about ensuring access, but it's so easy to think in terms of that people have time and access. And time is the other comment I wanted to just share with you. And this, for us, when we try to convince local governments, communities on risk reduction, is how we present the knowledge and the evidence and what we try to achieve. We cannot expect decision makers who have very little resources to spend so much time to try to access the wide base of knowledge resources that we have. So our responsibility for processing, and that processing we do with networks like yours, it's trying to balance off what can each community use best for their purposes. And these are responsibilities that are put on our shoulders, people like us. Because the more local you become, the less processing really I think people have the time and ability to do. And finally, on the platforms and networks, I have with me here a colleague who is actually from the private sector, from Cisco, and a few days ago he showed us a very beautiful image of what distributed networks and partnerships are about. He won't have time to do it now, I think, unless you want to stay and look at how starlings are congregating and flying and doing the same thing in flocks of probably hundreds of thousands of birds, without anyone having told them what they're going to do. So I think we have to think much more in terms of distributed networks and partnerships in the future. Because what you raised here, and I was really pleased to hear it, the quality of what you call a partnership. I think we really have to preserve the qualitative nature of partnerships and not allow it to decline to become something that is a contractual partnership, a paid partnership. But as one of you already said, it's entering the language everywhere. So maybe this type of work that DESA is doing now is to really bring the enormous experience of partnerships. I think this terminology has been used now for 15, 20 years. Try to help us to work through what are genuine partnerships as opposed to contractual agreements and many other areas, but also look at how effective partnerships and platforms work. What keeps them together and what drives their motivation to work in the same role. A few things that characterize what I think you've been doing here today and the last 2 days is the enormous willingness and ability for activism. And that's something that we really need to value. Whether this is typical for gender networks, I don't think so. They are the very activist partnership. But I do think, in particular for the next 5 to 10 years, because if we are going to get not only SDGs, but we are going to get much more integrated SDGs. A lot of activism and a willingness to reach out and cross all the barriers that otherwise we have been willing to accept will be required. Finally, I'd like to invite you to join a few other efforts that require activism. Every year, the 13th of October, in fact, The International Strategy for Disaster Reduction has a global mobilization on the Day of International Disaster Risk Reduction. This year, this day will mobilize women as leaders to reduce disaster risk and build resilience. So, whoever you are, whatever you would like to do, this is a completely local event. We monitor them with support, we engage. I think last year we had, this was children, about 110 countries around the world that did something. So you can either do it globally, locally, regionally, or community-based, but please think of it as an opportunity to not only think disasters, but urban resilience and leadership. And more long-term, we just started work on the Yoga Framework for Action that will start in 2015. So 2015 is of course a critical year for many of us in many ways. And obviously we look at how we can influence and ensure that we get risk reduction, prevention, resilience into one or all of the SDGs if you ever have this cross-cutting issue. But join us also in the work to define what the risk management framework beyond 2015 will be. Many of you are familiar with the venues where we do this work. If you are not, please talk to your colleagues and they will be able to advise you. So congratulations for the work you've done. I look forward to see these indicators in the follow-up to Rio plus 20. And then when we meet again for Rio plus 40, we will be able to measure progress. Thank you very much.